Good evening, campers, it's me, Kieran. Today we are going to talk about Kafka on the Shore. You've read this Murakami novel, you're probably interested on how the hell I'm going to explain any of this. And if you've not read this, I don't think this is going to make any sense at all. If there's anything readers know about Haruki Murakami is that he really writes two categories. His straightforward romantic works, such as Norwegian Wood, or his off-the-wall surreal works, such as 1Q84. And Kafka on the Shore, would you believe it, definitely falls on the surreal side. However, Kafka within Kafka on the Shore is not used in the way that the Kafkaesque is normally used. To explain, a lot of people use Kafkaesque in order to describe anything surreal or absurd, but it has a very particular use. But for me, Franz Kafka, and therefore the Kafkaesque, has something to do with the analysis and the critique of work, of the workplace, of the bureaucratic. If we talk about Franz Kafka's most notable work, Metamorphosis, the crux that Samsa has to face is not the fact that he's turned into a beetle, but that he's first late for work, which means that his boss turns up at his door, and then subsequently is the fact that he does not go to work. It's not the problem that he's transformed, the problem is he's not going to work. And we can see this criticism and fascination almost with work and the workplace within his other short stories. And the one that I recommend people read is Poseidon. I believe it's like 1.5 pages long, about the great god Poseidon, who just can't get through all the paperwork. He doesn't do anything because he can't get rid of all the paperwork. And this is what I was expecting from Haruki Murakami, that there was going to be a criticism of work, but that doesn't really seem to fit into this novel, because our character, Kafka, one of two main protagonists, is a 15-year-old boy who just wants to run away. Kafka feels disembodied with society and wants to search for his mother and sister. He feels as though that will give him some structure. Ultimately finds himself finding refuge within a library. And this is where we meet the pivotal character and librarian, Miss Sayeki, who advises Kafka, well, isn't this a bit of a coincidence? I have a painting called Kafka on the Shore, which was painted for me by an ex-lover of mine when I was very young. Kafka views himself as the boy within the picture, because luckily for us, Miss Sayeki has, upon viewing the picture, written a song also called Kafka on the Shore, where the message of that song is advising for us to finds one place within the world. With Kafka only being 15, it's very obvious that he's going to feel a connection to that he wants to find his place within the world. At that age, everything feels tumultuous. He feels ousted, he feels alienated, especially when you consider the absence of his family dynamic. Now, this notion is emphasized by Murakami because he writes that Kafka's favorite story is in the penal colony. Now, I've not read In the Penal Colony for maybe over a decade, and maybe before we touch that, I will say that Murakami, even if you have or haven't read In the Penal Colony, is very good at explaining to the reader, bringing to the forefront the precise thing that he wants to talk about and what he's going to discuss. And Murakami writes that he is interested within how Kafka talks about the mechanics of the torture device within the penal colony. Not the fact of how it was used, not in regards to the repercussions of using such a device in the penal colony, but just how that machine is manufactured, how it is made. It is about the machinations rather than the affects and uses of the machine. Bearing that in mind, when I read that line, I was trying to figure out what Murakami is actually trying to do, and it felt as though Murakami was going to talk about the process of how, even though life is tumultuous, that there is a path for everyone, and that Kafka was going to be okay. But the problem here is that I've already told you about one of the two main characters. Let's talk about the second character, of which this novel flits and alternates chapters between. So we've covered Kafka, we're now going to talk about Nakata, who we open in World War II, where it seems as though Nakata is one of a handful of students who has completely lost their ability to remember, write, and read after a interference with some gas. This means that Nakata has not really had a great life. Well, it seems to us that he hasn't had a great life. Nakata loves living sub-city, which actually means subsidies, and enjoys returning cats to their owners because he can now speak to them. And if you think that's a little bit weird, I assure you, the weirdness factor definitely escalates within Kafka on the Shore. Again, I've read 1Q84, and I think Kafka on the Shore trumps 1Q84 on the weird factor. Things happen in this novel that really blur the line between, is it a dream? Is it real? It's really difficult to get your head around what is happening, why it's happening, but in true Murakami style, he just brushes away what he doesn't want to talk about anymore. So some things are explained, others not a foggiest. I digress. Where does Nakata fit into all of this? He likes returning cats and realises one day after returning one cat that he's kind of got himself not implicated but involved in a murder case. So decides to venture out to solve it. He then meets Miss Sayeki, who advises that it's not Kafka who is ultimately Kafka on the shore, it is Nakata who is Kafka on the shore. For reasons. So we have Kafka's and Nakata stories that don't really interlink, but they interrelate. And if you think this is all becoming a little bit complex, don't worry. We have an Oedipus complex umbrella in. This is a difficult book not only to summarise, but to articulate what is even going on. Murakami is very good at explaining or writing these scenes to the reader, so it's very readable. You can read this at pace. It's got you gripped trying to figure out what is going on, and I think even the ending, I don't think anyone's seeing where the ending's going on this. It certainly has the tropes and meets the expectations of what you expect within a Murakami novel. The only thing I can compare this to is not even his other works, but the arc Sakura by Kobo Abe, which I've reviewed, I'll link that down below, in the fact that I think this is a simple story, similar to the arc Sakura, but so much weird stuff is happening that you don't even know, like, why anything's happening. I'm aware that Abe was a huge influence on Murakami, and the arc Sakura is definitely a poorer novel in comparison to Kafka on the Shore, but ultimately it's so weird. The only thing that I can say that justifies this weirdness is that Kafka himself starts to read 1001 Nights, which is the story where Scheherazade, I still can't say the name, Scheherazade? Let's go with Scheherazade, where she is to be executed, and in telling 1001 stories, ultimately prolongs her life. And I feel as though this is what Murakami is trying to do, to bring it back to what Murakami has written about the penal colony within Kafka on the Shore. It feels as though Murakami's not really interested in story when it comes to this novel, but interested in the mechanics on the story. How can he glue together all these pieces to make not really a cohesive whole, but in order to explain to readers the life is worth living, and even if it's not the life that you intend, even if it's not the right road, that ultimately it's all out of your control, yet there is control within that life. I'm going to give Kafka on the Shore a 6 out of 10, but interestingly, this is the novel that everyone seems to say, if you're new to Murakami, this is the one that you should read. And I don't think I agree with that. I think this is very trippy. It's very readable, but all of Murakami's works are readable. That is one thing I will say about Murakami, is that he is a pleasure to read. He is effortless with his prose, and he can clarify exactly what he wants to do for the reader. But I would say don't start off with this one, because all of his other books they're not even close.